Now, today is World NGO Day, a celebration of the work that non-profit organizations do. Now, a recent survey of over 170 NPOs around South Africa shows the pandemic has had a significant impact on NGOs, including grief, burnout, compassion fatigue, anxiety, as well as stress among many of the workers of the NGO sector. Joining us now to explain a first-of-its-kind approach to tackle this problem is Cassie Chambers, and she's Operations Director at the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. A very good evening to you, Cassie, and thank you so much for your time today. Now, it's quite ironic, don't you think, the fact that usually NGOs are the ones that actually go out into communities assisting those who are distressed in one way or another. But COVID-19 has also just revealed just how vulnerable NGO workers are themselves. Talk to us about this dynamic.
And that's so true. You know, before COVID, our NPOs and NGOs were working on the front line, working in communities, normally door to door, really dealing with really difficult situations, trauma, grief, poverty, unemployment, doing amazing work. And then COVID hit, and that was really difficult for a lot of NGOs. We've heard of so many that have had to close their doors or stop their operations or who lost funding, but yet they were still helping in the community. They were still on the front lines and dealing with so much, especially when so many people were desperate and having to find shelter and food and security. And the NPOs around the country just, worked even harder, longer hours. And what we actually saw was that the increase in stress and anxiety and burnout, all while these volunteers and staff working for NPOs were also navigating a pandemic by themselves, the impact on their families financially. So they really were going above and beyond to help so many, and there was very little support out there. And that's why it was so important to launch something that looked after the mental health of NGOs, so that we could make sure that they were still around for long after COVID.
And talk to us about some of the challenges that NPOs faced specifically during this COVID-19 pandemic.
I think one of the common themes is obviously just a lot of projects and operations closing due to COVID regulations. A lot of projects that they were getting funding for had to come to an end. Also, because of every other company and sector also really battling, they actually saw less funding coming into the organization. So that meant that they were worried about how to pay their staff, how to pay for projects, their overheads, and really making difficult decisions. So many NGOs were going month to month. The really sad outcome of COVID and the impact that it's had on so many people, especially the NPO sector, who's already vulnerable and at risk due to financial issues, is so many had to close, and they were doing amazing work in community. So it's incredibly sad that there's been so many NPOs that aren't able to do what they're so good at doing and really helping. What we've also had, and even through the Empower helpline, is so many NPOs who are dealing with the trauma of just helping people on the front lines. So many people are really just battling. They're going through really desperate situations, and the NPOs are often the ones holding and carrying that burden.
So talk to us, I guess, about the role that NPOs play, how they interact and interface with government as well as public sector, and their community service mandate. If you could just highlight the importance of this particular sector.
Absolutely, and it's definitely the backbone to South Africa, is because we have so many. At the moment, there's over 270,000 registered NPOs in the country, and they're normally on the ground in communities that are really giving in such important work and working door to door. They know their community, they know their society, they know what needs to happen, and they often bridge the gap between what we don't have enough of from government, and then bridging the gap to community. There's so many different sectors, from education to welfare to health to security, and they really fill in so many different gaps. And these are people that have the heart, the commitment, and the dedication. So often they're the ones that are working harder with less resources to really fight and represent all the people on the ground and the community on the ground. So their mandate is for the people. And they're really helpful in bridging that gap and being a bridge from the community members to government resources.
And you mentioned that word bridge, which is so key. Do they have the requisite support from government, from the private sector, to enable them to fulfill that mandate of bridging the gap?
You know what, and that is such a really good question. And, you know, during COVID and all the different relief funds and forums and networks that were put in place, there wasn't a specific NPO network to look after that sector. There weren't certain benefits or relief funds to look after the NPO staff and volunteers and even their projects, which were helping and the go-to places during COVID. So it's incredibly difficult. And if we see the outcome of not having enough support, whether it be from government or private, we know that a lot of NPOs have had to stop doing their work. And that's incredibly sad because there's so many people that rely on them. So while they're the bridge, you know, we know of so many NGOs who have just tried to do whatever they can with as little as they have. There's been some really great partnerships between public and private partnerships between companies and NPOs and NGOs. And that's always really, you know, like the flagship of projects that we see in the community. But they aren't enough. And the NPO sector needs so much more support. And this is why we're wanting to highlight them and the amazing work that they're doing. For World NGO Day today, the theme is around celebrate, collaborate. And I think that's what we really just have to remember is kind of focus and highlight the amazing work and how we need NPOs. And we need to make sure that we can advocate for NPOs for more funding and support from various different departments so that we can make sure that NPOs can still be doing what they're doing and helping so many people on the ground.
Cassie, you mentioned the lack of support or at least a structural network around NPOs. How organized is the sector? I mean, do they have a touch point? Should social department or any other arm of government want to assist them as a body? Does that actually exist?
It does. So NPOs are registered through the Department of Social Development. They're compliant and they have to submit reports. So that's kind of the regulatory or the oversight body that looks after so many NPOs in the country. And out of all the different work that they're doing, a lot of NPOs are trying to be proactive and work with different companies. And there's so many different forums as well, alliance organizations, national alliances of NPOs. And I think the sector itself is really trying to organize itself and collaborate. One of the amazing examples is through the Patient User Network, which is a group of NGOs who focus on patient health needs. And they've actually come together from various different sectors as a way to really represent their communities, their patients, and organize themselves better. And that was even evident through the Presidential Health Summit Forum. So yes, the sector is getting more organized, and there's definitely a need to mentor and provide more support. Again, they're the link to the community. So if we can try and meet in the middle, again, bridging from all sides, I think we can only have a stronger community and a stronger strategy going forward.
Now, Cassie, it is World NGO Day, and from the work that you do as the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, what are the measures and the type of advice that you're giving to NGOs at this time on how they can thrive and not just survive through COVID-19?
And that's so important. You know, COVID has shown us, which is almost a year ago, where we thought it was only going to be 3 weeks of lockdown. It's nearly a year that we've been down this road. And I think one of the biggest things that we're doing is sharing resilience, sharing coping skills, and providing support that the NGOs and the NPOs around the country who are doing such critical, crucial work to help support so many people is to make sure that they have the mental health stamina and the resilience to get them through this marathon. You know, before COVID, the mental health of NGOs and NPOs were not a priority. There was very little support for NPOs. And now we're able to provide free telephone counseling, group debriefing sessions, and even training NGOs on key mental health resources, trauma debriefing, counseling skills. So when their beneficiaries that they're looking after in their communities, they can use those skills, and that can make a huge difference. So we're really just trying to equip and support our NGOs to get them through the rest of this marathon.
Now, Cassie, is this a nationwide operation that is being conducted with SADC?
Yes, it is. We're really, really proud of Empower. It's a 24-hour, 7 days a week support system in place. It's throughout the country for any community organizations, NGOs and NPOs, really just providing them whatever kind of mental health support they're needing, whether it be their staff or the leadership, or even the volunteers and beneficiaries. We've seen such a huge response since this initiative was launched in October, with hundreds of calls in the first month. So the need is there. And NPOs, often when they're calling in to get help, is kind of this disbelief to say, is this really available? And it's so needed. So we're just really thrilled that from an NPO, we can also be looking after our fellow NPOs through this pandemic and beyond. This is a sustainable project. It's going to last a lot longer after COVID. And the mental health of NPOs are important. They're doing such amazing work on the ground, and they need every bit of support that they can get.
And I must say that the service that you are providing is so much needed, helping the helper, literally, because most of the time nobody really focuses on them. They're busy focusing on everybody else. So really capacitating them with not only the emotional and the psychological support, but also the skills and the training, as you say, Cassie, to be able to meander through this time, not only for the organizations that they serve in, but also for themselves as individuals, whether they're mothers, fathers, and the communities that they themselves come from. Cassie, thank you so much for your time this evening as we mark World NGO Day. That's Cassie Chambers there. She's Operations Director at the South African Depression and Anxiety Group.